Nosa, when I read this book, it blew my mind. And it's talking about the ancient civilizations of Egypt. It took me into India, about the Harappan civilization. It took me into the Aborigine civilization down in Australia. It took me to all around the world. I'm having a mental conversation with the book. You're lying. I'm thinking, you are lying. Egypt's nowhere near Africa. And something made me just get up and get an atlas to show how these people can lie in books to black people. And I looked up Egypt. Brother, I was blown to pieces. That Egypt wasn't near Africa, it was in northeast, literally in Africa, the continent itself. And that made me think how ignorant I was. That was the beginning of knowledge.
Actually, this has been built very much on our shoulders.
I've been working with Islington BME forums for Black History Month. I was asked to explore Black history in contemporary UK society through the medium of film. I was to ask what was the importance of Black history. Almost immediately, my mind was a fuzz of conflicting ideas and thoughts. How can you define the history of an entire ethnic whose history was being spoke about? Who did it really affect? With all these questions, I decided I needed a place to start. So I took to the streets of Britain's most multicultural city, London. Interestingly enough, I had a very tough time finding monuments or statues dedicated to great black people of the past. This man is definitely engraved in history. But what about the black people who lived here? Where were their monuments? Feeling a bit disappointed in my search, I decided to drop by a man who knew far more about the history of London than I.
My name is Tony Warner. I'm the director of Black History Walks. Black History Walks runs walking tours of London from an African perspective. Because I'd done a number of kind of the regular London tourist walks, the Jack the Ripper walk, the Ghost London walk, the Beatles walk, the Rainbow walk, whatever. And I'd done all these walks and I'd never come across any or hardly any references to black history. So I thought that there must be some kind of African Caribbean presence in this city going back a couple hundred years or whatever. So I started doing my own research. And about 5 years ago, I researched the first one, which is in St. Paul's. As far as history being important in general, well, you can just see that is the case by just walking down the street, because you'll see statues of dead white guys from 300 years ago in Trafalgar Square. In any part of London you go to, you see statues. You see the names of streets which reflect what happened there hundreds of years ago. So there's no people in the world that have actually progressed if they've not remembered their history.
Talking about African people living in London in the 15th century. You know, African people running around London, especially in the southeast London, before slavery started.
Back in the Elizabethan age, Queen Elizabeth I herself was saying that there's too many black people in the city of London. Now you think to yourself, wow, I only thought black people were here from the 40s, the 50s. No, they were here from 1600 and something, and she was telling them to get out then.
When the Moors was black people from Africa, when they ruled southern Europe for 800 years, they were of course coming here. They were coming here and they were sharing their knowledge with people here. We can look at an example in a film of that, of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Like the role that Morgan Freeman played, he played a Moor. And we can remember in that film, he brought out a telescope, yeah, and was to look at the enemy and said, yo, check this out. And he gives it to Robin, and Robin starts pulling his sword out. He's like, what kind of magic is this?
I turned to the internet next to look up black people who had been prominent in British history. Even though these amazing people were not exalted in statues, I decided to go to the streets again, this time to see if their greatness had been preserved in another form, in the minds of the British public.
Mary Seacole?
Oh. No. No idea.
No idea.
No.
Septimus Severus?
No. Sorry.
Nah, I don't. Oladu Equiano?
No. No.
Mary Prince?
No.
Septimus Severus?
Who?
Septimus Severus. Septimus Severus. Oh my god. I've heard the name, but I can't tell you any information. I think it's something. Oh no, might not be.
Mary Seacole.
Yeah. Was she the woman with the nursing? Yeah.
I don't know that one either.
Really?
Yeah, really. really.
The cultural identity of a child does impact on their attainment.
I had come across the Department of Education's website. I was drawn to one particular statement on their Charter for History. I decided to ask a few friends and professionals if they thought history was really doing this for people in schools.
Young people growing up here, those of us of African descent, like we maybe feel disconnected in schools from secondary school because our image is not positively embraced and shown, right? And if they look at Black history in the schools, one of the main things they deal with is looking at kind of like our history starting with slavery.
If the only thing you ever learn about Africans is about enslavement, then that's not, it's not a kind of liberating experience, it's not an empowering experience, and it's a distortion of history. You know, if we take Africa, say Africa is the birthplace of humanity, you know, we've got, you could say, millions of years of Africa's history, or at least, you know, whatever figure you want, 10,000 years of written history. So if you just take, out of those 10,000 years, you just take 400 odd years when Africans were enslaved by Europeans and others, it distorts the history.
We're going from, what, 1800s, moving forward to the 1940s. But what happened before, during, and now? Do you know what I mean? There's some serious gaps that have been left here.
Visually, from what I remember, it's a book with the slave ship. You know when the Africans, the way that, you know, we were stuck up. That's the image that was on the book. So I guess that's the beginning of history, I guess. Yes.
I think it was like 70% predominantly Black.
When I first went to school, I was the only Black person. So yeah, there was no room for any Black history there, I guess. That's the way that they looked, you know, they looked at it when they were teaching us.
For me, I did give up on school. I gave up, and I was more than able. I was top English for my whole secondary school period until the end, where they was like, Mikel, you better take the low one or you're gonna fail, which I did anyway. Did you get it? Because I just gave up. I didn't see how it was gonna benefit me.
I mean, there was occasions when I did try to educate people, and did try to kind of, you know, show people a bit of culture. I mean, there was one point when we had like a show and tell day at school, and I actually brought my African dress in, my head wrap and everything, and I put it on with my traditional beads, and people's reactions, like, it was just like...
When I was in secondary school, and I didn't really know no better, I know this is the craziest thing to say, but I was ashamed of being a Nigerian.
Well, I've been privileged, although I'm not happy how the young people that I work with have arrived where they are, but I've had the privilege of helping to shape them, helping to navigate their course. And a lot of the people that I've worked with around the criminal justice issues, who are, let's say, offenders, maybe they're on the cusp of offending, they're not even offending yet, they don't even recognize that their behavior is going to take them on a criminogenic path. When I get to closely work with them, I find out that they're lacking often in their identity, in their sense of self. Nobody has been educating them about that. They feel they've got no hope, no chances. And I feel also the school curriculum is vital. You know, there's been many campaigns to help to get Black history taught on the curriculum. I understand that we're looking through a window at the moment. We're on the cusp of that. But I hope that we can make sure that it's indelibly inscribed in the curriculum.
We live in a predominantly white country. We can't argue with that. That regardless of what we want is neither here nor there.
In the same way I'm saying it, and we sit down and devise a curriculum, the four of us here, and say, right, this is going to give black children the best grounding that they need. If they learn about this and they learn about this and they learn about this, there's going to be another family down the street that's saying that's not right.
Because the school can't cover everything in the curriculum, it just can't be done.
I think, European people probably think it's not their job to be teaching us our history, you know what I mean? We live in Europe, we live in Britain, learn British history, learn English because you live here. To a certain extent, fair enough, but British history involves African people.
You got to a situation now where parents are putting the blames on schools, sending their kids to schools, expecting them to be disciplined, expecting them to learn, now expecting them to have a black history curriculum.
I think there is a public duty on mainstream schools to educate all their children. And we're talking about in London, the children of non-white British, in other words, black and minority ethnic, are in fact the majority. We keep talking about minority like we have no say or we shouldn't. But you ask any child, you go into most primary schools, you're talking about 60, 70, 80% non-white. The language is spoken at home, we're talking about 40% of children speak another language other than English at home in London. Yeah, so the statistics, just in terms of actually being proportional to your client and your customer, schools should reflect that and should embrace the cultural heritage of the children that come there. We need schools that place the crowns above the heads of our children and help them to grow to reach that. I actually wrote a paper and was part of a group trying to set up the International African Academy. My group, along with about 8 or 9 others, we put in well thought out, innovative proposals for free schools targeted in the disadvantaged areas of this country, and particularly in London, and that means our people. Every single one of us were rejected. The latest one, which I know was a diaspora school in Lewisham, one of the reasons that was given to them at their interview was that they had too high expectations for their children.
We can't educate children if we stay within the box.
Martin Luther King was labelled as a terrorist by the FBI, and then but even still now he's seen as an icon of the black civil rights movement. So if you know that what you're fighting for is true and right, then you should never give up on it.
I had heard about a school that teaches black history all year round. I decided to go and check it out.
I love black history.
It's not taught as a separate part of history.
I mean, you can teach the First and the Second World War and teach about black experience in that.
Teachers will share with you their own experiences or their parents' experiences, and it makes you feel that they're actually passionate about what they're talking about.
My teacher always teaches us from both point of views.
We value group discussion, whole class discussion.
And from people like stating their points and backing it up with like different types of evidence, you're learning more.
Arguments break out, but they're purely over debate.
In this school where history is taught, it's very visual.
So images are really good ways in because everybody understands images.
They asked the black Americans to go back with them in World War I and World War II. But they were fighting a war abroad and also a war at home.
I've learned more about my family because I never knew that like part of my family were Maroon.
What we teach isn't in mainstream textbooks. And that's why we might have to do more discussion, and I think that's why our kids are more articulate.
Marcus Garvey, he knew what he wanted from when he was younger, and then he went through it and he made big changes.
Malcolm X. He's the guy that had the most impact.
People don't realise the impact that they have personally on being a history teacher.
I feel inspired when I come out of a history lesson.
Whatever situation, whatever kind of tough situation you're in, you can always break through it.
I have a dream. Pride and honour in being where you're from because you know how much your people have gone through.
Well, it just makes me feel quite strong, and where I'm actually coming from, it just amazes me each and every day.
St. Mary's was a breath of fresh air, and for that reason, their imminent closure was ever more troubling. I decided to speak to Robin Whitburn of the Institute of Education, who himself had been a teacher at St. Mary's. I wanted to ask him why there were so few schools and so few teachers who operated and taught history in the way that St. Mary's did.
There is space, there is certainly space within the national curriculum in history and within GCSE and A-level syllabuses for students to learn topics that we would consider to be black history. I wouldn't say it's the willingness of teachers that is the major impediment, but the actual the knowledge, because there are so few universities that actually offer black history programs. Certainly there are hardly any universities in the country that do black British history.
We're living in the information age. Go out there and find it for yourself.
I decided I would look for resources that could be powerful aids for teachers on black history. My first stop was
www.blackhistorystudies.com, 24/7, 365 days of the year.
Martin is painted as the nice guy. Yeah, Malcolm is the horrible guy. He's the black man that you really don't want to know. He's an angry black man.
Our mission statement is educating the community to educate themselves. And basically, we intend to do that by any means necessary. Kwame Ture was part of Martin Luther King's movement. And he was the radical side, the youth side of Martin Luther's movement. And he wanted to kick down people full stop.
I'd say that there's a whole spectrum of our people out there who are crying out for this, but we don't necessarily recognise that's what they require in their lives.
Presentations, film screenings, long courses, short courses. We mainly deal with adult education, although we have a lot of children's programs, but we believe that if we can get the adults, then it's their duty to then pass on the information to the children.
So a desire of the George Palmer Institute is to get their archives out to schools, get them out to young people and introduce them to the world of archives. So a way in which we do this is by running outreach projects. The photograph you can see here is of me working with a local primary school, South Haringey, so Haringey Juniors. For them it was giving them the opportunity to find out about John LaRose, who was a local figure to them, but somebody that they were unaware of.
I'll come back to Islington to talk about John LaRose, the founder of the UK's first black bookstore and the UK's first black publishers.
I mean, before he opened a bookshop, he used to go around selling books in a bag, actually with Sarah White and a moped.
One of the driving forces for John was that we must read about ourselves and learn about ourselves. We must write about ourselves. We must not depend on, very generally on the white man to write about our history and about us and so on. We must do it for ourselves. And I think that was a big motivating kind of force for him.
Never heard about it. Little known fact, I'm happy to present this.
Because he's half Nigerian, half Ghanaian, isn't it?
No. It's from the east. But the thing is, this has to be the first or one of the first ever recorded kind of like, let's say, images or pictures of money. What we would know as money. See what he's holding in his hand? What is that?
A coin.
It's a gold coin. Seriously, I'm happy to present that. So this guy basically he took his money to he went like on Hajj. Basically, he was a Muslim guy, went on Hajj to Saudi Arabia, and he basically bankrupted the economy because of the amount of gold he basically brought with him.
Basically, I'm a youth club. We've got a man which is coming in, teaching us about Black History Month and loads of different things, and it's basically changed my opinion on Black History Month. Before, I thought that it's all the same thing every single year, and how we do the same things, like you learn about the slave trade and that's about it, and just for 1 month and sometimes even a week at school. But there's other things you learn here about, so much different things.
Well, like to even know
like certain things. Like I mean, like I never knew that black people got migrated here in the 1950s, just after World War II, to basically like to rebuild the economy. And I guess now, like when people tell me, yeah, like because of us you're here, I seem to understand it a bit more.
The archive initially started as a response to the riots of the spring of 1981 and the desire to both own and have authorship over black history. Now these are actually plantation papers. They're very, very valuable indeed. Very, very important. These are papers from one of the plantations owned by the Gale family of Jamaica, and carpenters, coopers or barrel makers, masons, stone workers, etc. Kent, Becky, Venus. Well, of course they cannot have family names because there can be no family. These individuals can be sold, they can be transferred. This is an example of one of the earliest magazines we have by and for black people in Britain. James A. Weatherall actually advertises himself as saying that coloured applicants are welcomed, stating it quite blatantly here, that coloured applicants are welcomed.
That would have been like a reaction, I guess, to
the no dogs, no blacks, no Irish, which was the signage which greeted a lot of house hunters or room hunters or shelter seekers during this period. We have the particular set of records which are the Barbara James records. A family of, we'd now say, middle class, upper middle class black people who are part of a very interesting social set at the beginning of the 20th century that lived in London. This photograph's taken in 1902. You have to remember, most people didn't have access to photography. It was a luxury. It's one of a number of comparatively affluent black families who were living in London at that time, who weren't just sitting back enjoying their money. They were involved in political reform, Pan-Africanism. They knew W.B. Du Bois. They knew John Archer. They knew Samuel Coleridge.
Amazed by the sheer history here, I stayed for a while, just looking and researching. I was lost on an island full of ancient treasure and mystery. And as I sifted through the countless books, newsletters, and objects, something dawned upon me. I had gone to school just 5 minutes away from this place, and I had never known of its existence until just a week ago.
How can nobody tell me this?
Right now, actually, I'm going to the Globe Academy, my old school. Last time I was here was, 10 years ago, so it should be really interesting.
That's why you look at the sun. The sun is over 2,679,785 miles in circumference, over 853,000 miles in diameter, over 14,972 degrees. It's a bad boy up there.
Feeling somewhat changed by my exploration, I had come back to my old school to talk to a man they call the Investigator. He holds after-school classes at inner city schools, preaching a message of upliftment and transformation. He is a man whose life is a testament to the transformational power of black history.
I'm one of those youth that literally failed all their exams in school. I failed every exam, and it wasn't because I was stupid. It wasn't because I lacked academic skills. It was because no one had told me that I was worth anything. No one had told me anything about who I was, where I'm coming from, the civilization that we actually built. What we should try to do, okay, especially the youth in schools today, is to give them that power, that energy that says, you know what, I really want to learn. When I read about our civilizations, I didn't just say, oh, wow, look how good we were in our black history. It made me think, if we built Egypt yesterday, then we've got the ability to rebuild Egypt again today. Just by knowing my history, I said, you know what? If that is the case, then these exams I've failed, really deep down, I do have the ability to pass them and in fact smash them. And I went back to college with this new African identity, this new black civilization, cultural identity. I went back to college, and as God is my witness, brother, they could not give me an exam, not that I just couldn't pass, I was smashed with an A star. And that's why I take this thing very personal. I know what Black history has done for me.
Personally, I think for me it's all about self-worth, self-belief, and a foundation and a rock on which people base themselves.
I think that Black history is a living, breathing, if you like, entity of its own. We're all carrying it around.
It's people who are the makers of history, and that's very important that message gets across to people, because it opens up so many possibilities.
Because when you actually are really in touch with who you are, when you speak from those depths, you speak to humanity. All great people do.
If we all understand the way what we do, what we say, how we live affects everyone, then we can change the world like that.
Ever since the first person in Africa formed the language, we have been telling stories. And what is history if not the ultimate story? Now, as we move to a more codependent, globalized world, it's ever more urgent that all sides of the ultimate story are told. A greater knowledge of history allows people to respect one another and breeds peace through understanding. So that means that Black history is for everyone's benefit. My hope for Black history is that one day, when all ethnicities are fairly represented in our world view, it will not be necessary to call it Black history, but simply world history.